I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I was afraid of going to goth clubs for years. Spoiler alert, not anymore. So I got into the subculture when I was about 11 years old, when I found out there was a subculture based on all of the spooky, dark things that I loved growing up. I was positively thrilled, and that's how I eventually found the music via the internet. I did start out with the original 80s post-punk bands, but then moved on to the goth rock and dark wave of the 90s, as well as some wonderful neoclassical ethereal wave music with a gothic vibe, so loved it. Honestly, at that time, I didn't have the proper resources to be able to identify the different subgenres of goth music, so it did become difficult to find some of the stuff that I really, really liked. It would be very generically labeled as goth or industrial. So between those two parameters, I had to basically navigate where I could find the sound that I really loved. So there would be times when I would find something that was labeled goth, but then when I listened to it, it sounded like the clunky, noisy, empty post-punk music that stressed me out. But because I found out where I fit in, as far as my taste is concerned, I was still really motivated to dig to find the stuff that I really, really liked. I became involved with the subculture online around 2009 when I was 15 because there was no scene around me at all. Those of you who have been here with me for a while will recall that I came from a very small town in the middle of nowhere in central Washington state. So my only solace and only way of connecting with other goths was via the internet. The internet was also amazingly helpful with finding new music to listen to. I started interacting with other goths online. Some of them were my age, and some of them were older. As time went on, I saw this mindset kind of explode that I found to be rather toxic. However, because I had no scene around me to contradict that this mindset was not present in a real goth scene, I was under the impression that all goths behaved this way, especially the ones who were in a scene. A few years later, I became involved in a long-distance relationship with a goth guy who was 1 year older than me. He was part of a scene, so he was kind of my doorway into getting to know what an actual goth scene was really like. He was definitely really helpful with showing me new music, but I became conscious of the mindset that I spoke of. I saw it more and more among the online groups and communities, more implied and felt than outwardly stated. Things like, if you don't like the original 80s post-punk bands, you won't be considered a real goth, and trad goth and death rock are the only valid types of goths, both in terms of music and fashion. Then my ex would make subtle hints and suggestions on how I could improve my look as a goth. So I got the impression that I had to look a certain way to be accepted. Oh my god, that was just ridiculous. He would show me pictures of the goth model Razor Candy and say that I should try doing my hair and makeup like that. He'd show me pictures of one of the members of the band Two Witches wearing very extravagant romantic goth clothing, teased hair, facial piercings, and a certain style of makeup. And he would suggest that I should dress, do my hair, and do my makeup like her. And even when I protested and said that I didn't like teasing my hair, he'd clap back with, "Come on, it looks so good on you." Then came suggestions to get my nose pierced. I didn't want to because I was seriously engrossed in my voice training, and I didn't want that interfering with my voice. So he would say, "Get it anyway, you'll look better when you get it. God, you're such a conformist." Okay. When I would talk with friends and acquaintances of his who were trying to get to know me, and vice versa, I'd talk about my interests, and of course, I would mention my operatic training, only to get disapproval in response. That just felt so weird. I have mentioned this before in the past, but I think it really bears repeating with the subject of this video. So they told me,
You're betraying the subculture by doing operatic training because that's mainstream and conformist. You should be learning to sing post-punk style to preserve the goth subculture.
Okay. It was becoming clear to me now. I had to be a certain body shape. Mostly lean is what I was seeing. I had to do my hair a certain way. I had to do my makeup a certain way. I had to look like a trad goth or a death rocker. I had to listen to only 80s post-punk and death rock music. I had to do all of these things in order to be considered a real, authentic goth. It just left such a bad taste in my mouth, and I felt guilty about liking the music I'd heard from the 90s and the early 2000s. Yeah, that's pretty bad. I really felt like an imposter for not liking the 80s post-punk bands as much as I liked those other types of music. I felt like a poser for not wanting to tease my hair and getting my nose, lip, or tongue pierced. I was so confused, so overwhelmed, and very alienated, really. I thought, you know, for a subculture that claims to be about individuality and rebelling against the norm, I had to fit really strict criteria in order to be allowed to keep my goth card. I found that so strange. Again, because I had no scene around me and no other goths to interact with in person in a scene, to contradict this perception that these uninclusive pricks with sticks up their asses and something to prove I saw online represented all goths. So I thought all goths must behave this way, especially if they were part of an actual scene. That really hurt. I was afraid of being picked on and bullied by other goths if I did go into a goth club. Didn't look a certain way, not constantly talking about 80s goth, and being too young would be ammo for them to chase me out and become persona non grata. One who is not welcome. It was 2012 when I finally ended things with my ex. I'd had enough of him trying to shape me into his ideal goth girlfriend and trying to please him and his associates. After that was over, I found it incredibly difficult to listen to the music within the goth umbrella that I did like, because I still felt that kind of residual fear of being judged. It was so weird. It really was. As a response to this, I did drift into the world of symphonic metal. I didn't feel judged for not liking a certain subgenre or era of metal music. I didn't feel judged for training to be an opera singer. I felt at home for a while. After some of those effects wore off, I started finding my goth roots again in college. I could stomach listening to Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, The Cure, Susie and the Banshees, and The Damned again. The latter two I still really love to this day. I'd made a dating profile on OkCupid, and under music tastes, I did put some of the goth bands that I was slowly rediscovering, and a lot of the symphonic metal that I had started listening to a couple years prior. A guy came across my profile and decided to take time out of his day to tell me I wasn't a real goth, and that the only bands on my profile that weren't complete trash were Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, and The Cure, and I should kill myself. Yeah, quite the catch, isn't he? So once again, I lost my taste, for the most part, for Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, and The Cure, and from 2014 to 2016, I did very slowly rediscover all of the beautiful goth rock and dark wave bands from the 90s and 2000s that I had originally fallen in love with in my earlier years. I also got a little more accustomed to industrial because it was more atmospheric and retained the aggressiveness that I really liked from symphonic metal. So yeah, I fell in love again and rediscovered, you know, London After Midnight and Faith in the Muse, and Switchblade Symphony, and I felt like I was finding myself again. It really did. I also had a lot of time to reflect and dive back into my love for Gothic literature. It was actually the works of Edgar Allan Poe and Charles Baudelaire that helped to convince me to stop straightening my hair and let it go curly. I mean, seriously, look how long and curly my hair has gotten. This just feels so lovely to me. I can't believe I fussed for so long with straight hair. Anyway, It was Ligeia by Edgar Allan Poe and Le Chevalier by Charles Baudelaire that helped to solidify for me that it's valid to have naturally curly black hair. When I started talking about Gothic literature on my channel and how I felt like it had a good link to the subculture, I was told,
"You're only making a fuss about the literature because you don't know much about the music. Kill yourself."
Au contraire. I was also seeing people online identifying as goth, looking as extreme as possible, the trad goth style I was pressured into assuming when I was younger, and making these expensive fashion hauls, lots of makeup tutorials, and tacitly sending the message that you needed to do all of this and buy all of this expensive clothing in order to be goth, and music was hardly discussed. And other aspects of goth that I really loved, like the deeper aspects, the cultural side, in regard to the music and the literature and other things like that, just were completely on the back burner or out of sight, really. Then came some of the people out of the woodworks who were judging me on my appearance.
"You don't look goth enough. You look too understated to be a goth. You should look like blah blah blah. Why don't you have teased hair and heavy makeup? Curly hair isn't goth."
I even got some elder goths telling me that I was too young to truly be goth because I wasn't there in the 90s or the 80s like they were. That's funny. Even later on, when I was no longer afraid of these goth bullies and just saw them as complete clowns, I was told, I shit you not, I have been told this, I was too glamorous and refined to be a goth, and real goth girls like Susie were grungy and they were plain Janes with heavy makeup. So being glamorous and refined makes me unworthy of being goth somehow. That's hilarious. What really helped to drive home my goth roots from my youth, brought me fully out of my shell, and exercised the fear of judgment for not liking 80s goth music, was watching Angela Benedict. She was part of the era of goth music that I loved so much, and she was 15 when I was born in 1994, and that's when she became involved in the subculture, and I felt so supported when I befriended her, and I'm really thankful for our friendship. She's become like a big sister to me, and it's awesome. Or goth teen mom, as some people have joked around a little bit. I felt validated, and I was no longer afraid of being bullied for not being goth enough anymore. I no longer felt pressured to force myself into listening to Bauhaus, Sisters of Mercy, Joy Division, and The Cure in order to fit in. She was also really awesome about assuring me that if I did go to a goth club, I won't be approached and bullied like I was expecting to be. I also saw that she too was being bullied online for being more understated like I was. So I felt like I could really identify with her on that level. And that's when I understood what a music-based subculture really meant. It wasn't these ridiculous purists online squealing about how
goth is a music-based subculture, therefore goth is only about music, nothing else. If you think it's about anything else, you're a poser.
Again, they became clowns to me. I realized that we really weren't that different from the bohemians of the Belle Epoque era of the 19th century. Music was at the center of our culture, but keeping it afloat was philosophy, literature, deep intellectual conversations, some fashion, and a certain brand of artistic performance and expression. Not to mention absinthe drinking. I love absinthe. As if you couldn't tell. This was actually a really good point made by my friend Ruin. He made a video about this actually. He talked about how music-based subculture isn't just about music, and if it's honestly about liking a certain genre of music and nothing else attached to it, it's just a fan club, and it doesn't have the endurance and the sustainability that a music-based subculture, on the other hand, will. because a music-based subculture has all of those other elements that I mentioned previously. That's what latches itself into people and doesn't let them go, in addition to the music. There were a few aspects of the subculture that I loved a lot, and that I noticed were not being discussed. First of all, the music, and second of all, absinthe, and third of all, Gothic literature, because I just really felt the need to counteract all of the fashion hauls and the makeup tutorials and the reaction videos that I was seeing. Yeah. And I took the best advice I had ever seen, which was make the kind of content that you yourself want to see. That's when I started talking more about Gothic literature, and also when I decided to start doing absinthe reviews. I did talk a little bit about finding goth music that you like, and got involved in Angela's Hex Files Goth Bible book project, but what really drove it home for me to start talking more about music was getting incredibly excited about The Awakening's new album coming out, Chasm. That kind of excitement generating and kind of sparking within me this desire to share new goth bands with all of you. It was that and encouragement from Angela to talk more about new goth music, and I'm really, really glad that I did. I'm so happy to support new goth bands because that's what keeps the subculture going. So there were still a couple of points of apprehension that I was having about being part of an actual physical goth scene. One of them was seeing one of these like racist piece of shit douches online basically running some goth events and making it clear that you had to dress to the nines all the time if you wanted to be celebrated and noticed by photographers that were going to be at the picnic or whatever the hell event it was. That was annoying. So, a few months ago, I went to a goth club for the very first time. I was a guest to go into Club Mercury in Seattle by my friend DJ Demon Shadow. I had an amazing time. I had a very delicious drink. I played pool, and I danced. It was great. No one judged me for any of the things that had haunted me in the past. I realized even more that I wanted to make up for all of the lost time where I wasn't able to get involved in a goth scene. I want to make a positive difference and set a good example. I want to encourage young goths not to get hung up over materialistic bullshit that's being peddled to them online. That's why they have to go get this expensive goth catalog wardrobe in order to even be considered goth. Ignore the people who tell you that people who think music is an integral part of the subculture are elitists. What you find under the enormous umbrella of goth music may actually surprise you. It's so much cooler to be intellectual, well-read, cultured, being able to have an intelligent conversation, and immerse yourself in the music than it is to wear a mass-produced uniform to be accepted among something that is just so shallow and meaningless and vapid. So I'm here to tell all of you young goths out there, don't be afraid to go out. Get involved. Support the new goth bands. I promise you that if you go to a club or an event or a concert, that you will not be bullied by an 80s purist snob who tells you you're too young to be goth and you don't belong there. They don't have the balls to go out because they know they're going to get punched in the throat if they say the same shit in person that they squeal about online to bully people and make themselves feel better. Hell, like a year or two ago when there was this discussion online about goths not being able to read goth books in order to be real goths. Don't know how that's supposed to work. But they made a special point of going on this weird rant online, basically posting about goth facts that no one gives a shit about, and also making a special point of sticking it to people who like romantic goth and Victorian goth clothing by saying,
Real goth fashion is not Victorian cosplay. It's ripped up band t-shirts and fishnets because that's the only fashion that supports the music.
Would you mind, telling that to Dave Vanian? Really? If there is a way for you to start forming goth gatherings, no matter how small, do it. The more the merrier. I want this to endure, and I love it too much to just let it die. Love you guys. You're amazing, and I will see you guys later. Bye.